So in this video, I want to talk about accusatives without prepositions, and I don't mean the ones that are really obvious, like direct objects, which are obviously without prepositions, and they're kind of the first accusatives we learned. I'm talking more unusual ones without prepositions. And you'll find that largely they can do the same things as preposition accusatives, it's just you don't have a preposition. So in this video we're going to be talking about accusative of place and accusative of time without a preposition. Alright, so let's get started on that, and I hope we can learn something. Alright, so the first one we're going to do is the accusative of place to. This has an idea of a place, but with the idea of motion as well. And we've seen this with prepositions quite a bit, with in with the accusative, and pair with the accusative, and trans with the accusative. So we've seen these before with prepositions, but there are some without prepositions, which is why this is included in this video. So the ones we're talking about do not have a preposition. Alright, you're still going to have the same idea of motion involved as these guys, though. So if you're thinking about it as an arrow, if you're being very pictorial, then keep going with that. But these ones, like I just pointed out, are not going to have prepositions and still have motion. Okay, that means they're not going to be direct objects. Now, one rule, or another rule, is that they're going to be proper place names or the noun domum. Now, domum follows the same rule, so it gets included in this one too. But most of them have proper place names, much like if we had Italiam to Italy, or if we had Romam to Rome. And you'll note that we do have this idea of motion, so if we're going Italiam to Italy, we are not yet in Italy and we're going toward it, or we're entering it, or something like that. Same thing with Rome. If we're outside of Rome and then going into it or toward it, that is what we're talking about here. It is not simply a place where something is happening, it is some kind of motion to that place with this idea of motion. Okay, and the same thing with domum. Now, that's the idea that gives us our third rule, where we have to have a verb of motion, because remember, these guys here can be direct objects if we don't have a verb of motion. So that's an important rule. Our verb does have to have some kind of motion idea to it, some kind of going, or anything like that. It doesn't have to mean the word to go, but it can be the idea of going. Alright, so that's pretty much it. Let's take a look at an example down here. We have postquam, that's a subordinating conjunction. Caesar's our subject. Gallos, probably a direct object since it's a people. And then we have a verb, vikerat here, and it looks like that's going to end our clause there. And we have after Caesar had conquered the Gauls. That's Gallos, the Gauls. They're the people up in, I guess, what is modern France and Germany. Probably mostly France, though. Germany actually still had the Germans back then. But that's besides the point. We have here Romam, our accusative, and we're sensitive to the idea it can be a place to which, so we're just going to label it as an accusative and see what kind of verb we come up with. We cannot yet label it as a place to which, though. Let's keep that in mind. And then we have iwit. Now, we know iwit means to go. So it is a motion verb. And thus, we know that this is probably accusative. It is not a direct object. It is indeed a place to which. And thus we have, after Caesar had conquered the Gauls, he went to Rome with his troops, with his soldiers. So here we have this to Rome. Notice we can't make it a direct object because we can't go Rome. That doesn't really make any sense. So we have to have that idea of motion here, going to Rome. Okay, that's pretty much it. Rewind it if you need to review that, but we're gonna move on. The other one I'd like to talk about today is the accusative of time duration, and I'm gonna show you how this and the place are actually very similar things. The Romans had a much closer relationship between time and space as we do. For some reason, they kind of thought of time and space very similarly. And I'm going to talk about that in a little bit here. But the cool thing about this one, I think, is that they're a little easier to spot. First of all, they have no preposition yet again. You can say pair through these things sometimes. Or actually, that's probably the most common if we see like through many years or through many months or something like that. But you don't have to. In fact, I think it's more common to see an accusative without a preposition as time duration. But you're probably not going to have a preposition. And we're going to be looking for time words in the accusative for this one. So any kind of word of year, month, minute, day, hour, something like that, that's going to be the accusative that hints toward a time duration. And the third one is kind of neat because you can have with any specific or no specific verb categories. You don't have to have a verb of motion or a verb of saying or anything like that. There's just no specific category because it has to do with time, and any action can happen in time. Now, I want to point out something. In the ablative, like in the year, that's a point in time, whereas an accusative is going to be an arrow, a duration of time, which is why it's called the accusative of time duration. So I like to draw a timeline here. I'm going to leave those up there. If I draw a timeline and an action happened from here to here, if I'm trying to say that something was happening this entire time, I have to use an arrow and use that accusative. Whereas if I want to just say, like, when something happened at a certain point in time, I'm going to use that ablative. Alright, so if I want to just say at this time right here, something happened, I'm using the ablative case. But if I want to say something was happening during this whole time here, that's going to be our accusative case. So in many ways, like we had the places as a dot with an ablative, and an arrow with an accusative, you have the same kind of idea in time, which is, I think, a very interesting concept that brings time and space a little bit closer together in the Roman mind. And if you draw it on a timeline, it almost becomes spatial as well, which we just did. But maybe this example will help. Caesar, our subject, to whom we have an adverb then. Okay. Romam. Now, we could have an accusative place to which here, but we have to make sure there's a verb of motion before we think that. So let's keep that in our minds. Let's put a star there. Multos annos here, well, it means many years. It's a time word. And since we don't have any specific verb category, I'm thinking that this is probably a time duration. And then we have regebat. Okay, there's our verb. And I don't think it's a verb of motion, so that means that this guy has to be a D.O instead of a accusative place to which. Alright, so our final translation here. Caesar then was ruling Rome for many years, and that has that idea of, he started ruling Rome, and it happened a whole bunch of time until it stopped, and it happened through all of those years. It's a duration of time. It didn't just happen at a specific point in time. It happened for this entire duration. Okay? And that's why it is an accusative and not an ablative. So I hope that helps to make sense. And I also hope that this example helped you see, again, you don't always have to have an accusative of place to which with the proper noun. It can still be a direct object. Okay? So I guess to wrap up, I hope that this helped bring some of those accusative uses into light, and make sure to rewind if you didn't get something. But if you want to have a fun word to remember, or to label these as these accusatives without prepositions, you can always call them Accusawops. And the idea is accusative without preposition. And it's much like our Neo-Wop idea with the ablative, except you use the word accusative. So if you want to think of it that way, go ahead. I know that some people have caught on to that already, but if you haven't and you want to use it, go ahead. Although I do want you to be more specific. I don't want, if you just label as Accusawop, I'll ask you which kind. Much like a Neo-Wop can be a means or time, an Accusawop can be a time or a place. Okay, so I hope you enjoyed the video and I hope it helped.